What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another Pitching Ninja's Filthiest Pitches of the Day. Remember, before we get to those pitches, hit that subscribe button. Do it now. Make sure you never miss an episode of the biggest and best daily baseball show on YouTube. And now, without further ado, here are my Filthiest Pitches of the Day. I'm going to start with Johnny Brito, who had 5 Ks in 5 innings, giving up 2 runs. He relied on his fastball, was up to 98, as well as his changeup, and got a sword on his changeup. Brito was outdueled by Nathan Eovaldi, who was outstanding, getting the shutout. Eovaldi had 8 Ks and gave up only 3 hits in his shutout on 113 pitches. And he dominated with his curveball, his painted fastball, and his splitters. And it's really a mix of pitches that kept the Yankees off balance all day. He definitely looked like prime Nate Eovaldi. Hunter Greene had 10 Ks in 5 innings, giving up no earned runs. And he threw a mix of vicious sliders and fastballs in the upper 90s. And while I didn't think he had his absolute best stuff, he had some really good stuff. And to see him dominate with less than his best stuff, well, that shows you how good he is. And hopefully games like this get sprinkled in more and more this season for Greene, because he is a stud. But the path to being a great pitcher isn't linear. You're always going to have bumps in the road that you need to learn from. Greene outdueled Kyle Muller, who had 3 Ks in 5 innings, giving up only 1 run, and had this curveball. Dean Kramer had 6 Ks in 5 innings, giving up 5 earned runs. He did have this wicked sweeper, as well as his changeup and fastball. And he faced off against Eduardo Rodriguez, who had 5 Ks in 5 2/3 innings, giving up only 1 run. Relying on his fastball, his two-seamer, here you see a nasty two-seamer, as well as his cutter. Speaking of cutters, Corbin Burnes had 5 Ks in 6 innings, giving up only 1 run, thanks to his mix of sliders, curveballs, and of course, those nasty cutters. He also got a little help on this frame job. Look how much below the zone this is and how much that pitch is yanked up, and it's still called a strike. I know some people hate this egregious glove movement and think it means the umpire is automatically going to call a pitch a ball. It's just not true. Teams have studied this, and it works. It works better than just holding your glove where it was caught, even if it was caught in the zone. Burnes outdueled Reed Detmers, who had 6 Ks in 4 1/3 innings, giving up 7 runs, 4 of them being earned. Detmers started out great with 5 Ks in the first 2 innings, and then kind of fell apart a little bit later in the game, as he's done a couple of times this year. He relied mostly on his high-velo sliders, which were really nasty, and I expect Detmers to turn it around and put in a complete game effort at some point soon this season. These are kind of like the growing pains with young pitchers. Speaking of another young pitcher, Brayan Bello pitched yesterday, and his mix of changeups, fastballs, and sliders, it got him 6 Ks in 5 innings, giving up only 1 run. He has a really filthy changeup, and I know he's worked with Pedro Martinez on this changeup and has been called Little Pedro. Now, he's still got a ways to go to reach that level, and he probably never will, but he is a very solid pitcher. Baio outdueled Zach Plesac, who had 5 Ks in 3 1/3 innings, but gave up 5 runs. He did have this slider. Tommy Henry had these curveballs on his way to 3 Ks in 5 1/3 innings, giving up 4 runs. Vince Velasquez had another solid outing with 5 Ks in 6 1/3 innings, giving up only 2 earned runs, and had these sliders and fastballs. Bailey Ober had his mix of sliders and changeups on his way to 6 strikeouts in 5 2/3 innings, giving up only 1 run on 4 hits. And he battled Brad Keller, who had 5 Ks in 5 1/3 innings, giving up 1 run, thanks to his sinker, which got this sword, and a White Castle special. Joe Musgrove had these wicked breaking balls on his way to 3 Ks in 3 1/3 innings, but gave up 7 runs. There were 27 combined runs in this game that was played in Mexico City, which has notoriously thin air. So I'll give pitching results a little bit of a bye, because I'm guessing the thin atmosphere helped some of these balls get out. Lance Lynn had 10 Ks in 6 1/3 innings. He did give up 4 runs and only gave up 3 hits. The big man took a no-hitter into the 7th inning in this game and really seemed to have it going with his cutters and fastballs. I mean, check out this perfectly painted cutter. He did have a couple of balls, and in this case, they were in his hands during this K-strut. And I like this here. After he gets a generous call, he turns around and goes, How do you like that pitch, mother? Lance has no chill. Lynn's stuff was outstanding this game for 6 innings, and then the 7th inning, the roof collapsed on him. Christian Javier had 6 Ks in 5 2/3 innings, giving up 3 earned runs, and had his usual mix of invisible fastballs as well as his knuckle curves and sliders. And he battled Zach Wheeler, who had 7 Ks in 6 scoreless innings, giving up only 3 hits. He had his upper 90s fastball, his curveball, and these wicked sweepers. A very solid game from Zach. Grayson Rodriguez had 9 Ks in 5 innings, giving up no runs and had only 1 walk. And what really stood out to me again was his use of his changeup, which was disgusting. He threw 13 changeups this game and got 8 whiffs. And of his 13 total whiffs in the game, 8 of them were from his changeup. He had this barrel-locking front door changeup. You can see your brain telling you not to swing, but it ends up a strike. And of course, he threw in some mid-90s heaters too. Another young pitcher who appears to be figuring everything out. Edward Cabrera had 12 Ks in 5 innings, giving up only 2 runs on 3 hits. He had his 93-mile-an-hour changeups going. These changeups are filthy. At that velo with that movement, good luck. He also got a sword on a changeup. And he mixed in some vicious breaking balls, including his curveball and slider, as well as a few vicious sinkers. Just an incredibly solid effort by Edward Cabrera, and I expect he'll have more of these dominant games in the future because his stuff is very, very good. He's kind of a little Sandy Alcantara light, but pitches with just a little bit more emotion. It was turn back the clock night for Dick Mountain, aka Rich Hill. Mr. Mountain had 5 Ks in 6 1/3 innings, giving up only 2 earned runs. He had this curveball for a sword, this sweeper that broke 20 inches that he just created by changing his arm slot. He had this 69-mile-an-hour breaking ball with 22 inches of break. And of course, anytime Dick Mountain drops down and gives you 69, you have to feature it. And he had this one, where he drops down for a 70-mile-an-hour breaking ball that broke 20 inches. And Dick Mountain's fastball was up to 90 miles an hour this game, which is pretty good considering he is 43 years old. Here's a cool overlay of Rich Hill's fastball and his breaking ball, and you can see how much he changes his arm slots on these pitches. It helps him create different angles, different shapes, and different speeds. And as a hitter trying to face that, number 1, you get the element of surprise, and number 2, these pitches come at you in all sorts of different ways, making it really tough to hit. Crafty stuff by Rich Hill. Hill battled Patrick Corbin, who went 5 1/3 innings, giving up 3 runs, and had 2 Ks, 1 on this slider. Clayton Kershaw was almost perfect yesterday, with 9 Ks in 7 scoreless innings, giving up only 2 hits. He, of course, had his Cooperstown curveball and these vicious sliders, and attacked with elevated fastballs. Those elevated fastballs are a really good pitch for him because despite not throwing all that hard, it meshes really well with his Cooperstown curveball. You can see here a 91-mile-an-hour elevated fastball and a 74-mile-an-hour curveball that ends up in the zone. And because that curveball has to start so high to be a pitch in the zone, you need to throw some elevated fastballs to protect that curveball. It just causes the hitter to recognize the pitch a little late, and you get the swing and miss. Just a brilliant outing from Clayton Kershaw. He battled Jordan Montgomery, who had 7 Ks in 6 2/3 innings, giving up only 1 earned run, and had this sinker and curveball. Easton McGee had 2 Ks in 6 2/3 scoreless innings, giving up only 1 hit, and had this nasty 2-seamer that ran 20 inches. And he battled against yesterday's filthiest starting pitcher of the day, Kevin Gausman. Gausman was absolutely dominant. He had 13 strikeouts in 7 scoreless innings, giving up only 6 hits and 1 walk. The big story of this game is he got 20 whiffs on his splitter alone. That's the most whiffs in a single game on a splitter in the entire history of the pitch tracking era, dating back to 2008. He broke Shohei Ohtani's record. And of course, it wasn't just Gausman's splitter that was tough to hit. His fastball was up to 98 miles an hour. And with that high velo fastball, hitters are really pressed into making an early decision on whether to swing. And you can see how that causes problems with this overlay here. Here's an overlay of his fastball and splitter. And you can see why hitters were having fits all day with that splitter. Hitting is basically a guess. Now onto my filthiest relievers. Adbert Alzolay had these sliders. Felix Bautista had his overpowering 98-mile-an-hour fastball. David Bednar had this gas. Sir Anthony Dominguez had this wicked slider and 99-mile-an-hour fastball. Matt Brash had this vicious 90-mile-an-hour slider. Paul Sewald had this painted sweeper. Eric Swanson K'd the side with splitters. Justin Topa had this cutter and sinker. And I always love featuring Topa because part of the reason he was signed to the major leagues is by a tweet from me. I always like helping out young pitchers with really good stuff. DL Hall had these Ks with fastballs and changeups. Julian Merriweather had a great appearance with his fastball, slider, and changeup. Jhoan Duran had this 103-mile-an-hour fastball and this 99-mile-an-hour splinker that I paired up for this overlay. Those pitches track each other so well, and you can see that splinker just drop under that fastball, getting the swing and miss. Jordan Romano had this 98-mile-an-hour fastball and slider. Zach Pop had these absolute turbo sinkers. Look at the movement on these things. That's ungodly. Speaking of ungodly, my filthiest reliever of the day was Jordan Hicks. I know a lot of people counted him out, but Jordan Hicks is back. He had this 103-mile-an-hour sinker with 16 inches of run. And in addition to his mix of high-velo fastballs, he also threw in some wicked sliders. When Hicks is on, his stuff is like a cheat code. And now, my pitching ninja moment of zen. Yesterday, I featured a 20-foot bunt to a catcher that ended up being a double. Well, today it's kind of the opposite. This is a ball that should have been a home run, about an inch from going out. Polanco went into his home run trot and got thrown out at second base because the ball bounced back to the field. It's a strange world where a 20-foot bunt gets you a better result than a ball that was absolutely hammered. But here we are. What is up, everybody? Just a reminder, if you didn't use your Pitching Ninja 50% profit boost token yesterday, you can use it on today's games and get a 50% profit boost on any straight MLB bet. Of course, this can only be used at FanDuel Sportsbook. I would use my boost on Drew Rasmussen to get 6 Ks or more today. And for my parlay of the day, I'm going to go with Sonny Gray for 6 Ks or more, then take Nick Lodolo for 7 Ks or more, and top it off with Drew Rasmussen for 6 Ks or more. And another reminder, don't forget to use your 50% Pitching Ninja Profit Boost token at FanDuel. What would your picks of the day be?